Welcome. Here we are again, another regular guy Vikings hour. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you being here. In this episode, we're going to do a game preview for the Vikings-Jets game in London, which is literally happening in a little over 6 hours for me, or actually for everyone, but it's past midnight here on the West Coast, so I've got a game start time of 6:30 in the morning, so trying to get this show out, maybe get a little bit of sleep, and then can enjoy that game here in just a few hours. Just want to say once again, as usual, it's that I'm about 10 shows in or so at this point. I'm still trying to build a following, so if you could give me a thumbs up and a subscription, if you like the content here, I'd really appreciate that. But with that said, we can kind of get going. So let's start this off with a little beer. Got a nice deal on that beer. I don't know what kind of discount stores you guys have wherever you're from, but for me, it's a place called Grocery Outlet, and I found a nice 6-pack of Amber Lager for only $2 for a 6-pack. So, what is that, like 33 cents a beer? So not a bad deal, right? And it's not half bad, so it'll do. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna start off with what I usually start off with, and that is we're gonna talk about just some recent roster movement and stuff like that, and just kind of predict the inactives for the game coming up. Okay, so right off the bat, we know this has been reported throughout the week that TJ Hawkinson's 21-day practice window has officially opened. So he's officially off the PUP list. He's practicing with the team. Obviously, he won't play tomorrow or today technically, but looks like it opened as of the 4th, which was 2 days ago. Technically, it's the 6th now. So the Detroit game would be 16 days after the window opened. Now, in order for him to start practicing that Wednesday prior to the Detroit game, that would actually be 12 days. I don't know if that's going to be enough time for him. I think it's most likely we'll probably see Hock against the Rams, which is fine. So just 2 more games. And then we get Hock back. The offense is back to full strength, and we're going to be rolling. So we got a lot of good news there. So this was something I did just a tiny bit of research on because I myself wasn't sure, and that was our 2 guys returning from the short-term IR, Dalton Reisner and Gabriel Murphy. I was kind of curious what the rules were in terms of just like when those guys were supposed to come back. And so what I found out was that now that the 4 games are over with, now a window of 5 weeks opens up for both guys, where in those 5 weeks, the team has to then open up the 21-day practice window at some point within those 5 weeks. So the final that technically opened up on September the 30th. So the final day of those 5 weeks would actually be November the 4th, and then at that point the 21-day window would open if they choose to take it that long. So there's really no telling at this point at what time Reisner or Murphy will be ready to even practice and join the team. So for now, they're still probably, maybe a month or even 2 months away. So for now, those guys are still on the shelf, but that's okay. So we've got a strong roster, so no concerns there. Another thing that kind of happened this week was that Myles Gaskin got released, and Robert Tonyan got called up to the 53-man roster. So what ended up happening was that Myles Gaskin actually got re-signed back to the practice squad, and so now I believe his 3 call-ups start over. And as it turns out, our call-ups from the practice squad for tomorrow are actually Myles Gaskin yet again, and then Bobby McCain, the defensive back, who's mostly a safety, but can kind of play all over the defensive backfield, which is good. Which actually kind of brings me to my inactives, and that is that we're going to see some pretty typical inactives that we usually see in this game. Brett Rippon will be the emergency quarterback, number 3. I think Tristan will probably sit for this one. I think Walter Rouse will yet again sit for this one. I think Dwight McGlothern will yet again sit for this one. And then most likely Jalen Redmond and also Levi Drake Rodriguez will also probably sit for this one. And the reason why I think maybe those guys aren't getting quite as much playing time, at least yet, even though I think that our ones on the defensive line could use some rest. But I think it's because we play so much rotation, especially on 3rd down or like long down and distance. when we bring in guys like Jihad Ward and Pat Jones to the inside. And at times you'll see, four-man fronts with Grenard, Van Ginkel, Jones, and Ward, or even Dallas Turner mixing in there. And so those are actually the times when our number ones on the defensive line can get their breaks and get their snaps reduced just a little bit. Of course, Taki will remain being inactive, and he'll come in on those short down yardage situations to help with the run game. But then here's the one that I think is interesting. The last guy that I think will be inactive, somewhat having to do with Ivan Pace coming back, who I've highlighted in green. Obviously, I talked about Tunyon. He's on the 53 now. And then Pace is actually back for this one. We're like practically fully healthy at this point. But I think they're actually going to sit. I think Asamoah is not going to dress for this one. And I think part of the reason why I believe that is because Bobby McCain does play on special teams. Ivan Pace does play on special teams. And so most likely Asamoah's role as a special teamer, because clearly he's not going to play anywhere on the defense, even in late game situations. So I think my own personal opinion is that Asamoah will not dress for this one. That's kind of a he's literally been active for every game so far this year. It's kind of a personal pick on my part, but that's something I'm going to predict for this game. So again, your inactives for this one: Rippin, Tristan Jackson, Walter Rouse, Redmond, LDR, McLeathern, and Asamoah, with Gaskin and McCain being called up from the practice squad. And just kind of a heads up on this one, I'm not doing back-to-back shows tonight, just because we're so close to the start of the game. I'm actually going to combine both my preview show and my Power Rankings and Picks show kind of all into one. In addition to that, before I get moving on to the preview part of the show, we have a bye week coming up next week, as you know, and so what I'm doing is I'm actually saving a couple of topics for that bye week to help give me some content to talk about. And so that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah show that I've been kind of hyping up for a couple of weeks now, I've been doing a ton of research. I'm going to have a full hour, if not more, worth of stuff to talk about when it comes to Kwesi. I've been really just pouring over so much information to come up with just the best possible content that I can, and the most interesting topics that I can think of to talk about Kwesi and the job he's done as the Vikings GM. And so just look for that over the bye week. I've probably maybe gotten about 2/3 of the way through of the research that I want to do. I've still got a little bit more to do, and then once I'm there, look for that maybe like middle to late next week. And that's going to be a really, really interesting show. If you do enjoy watching this, I highly recommend going and watching that one as well, because I'm going to give you some opinions and perspectives you probably won't hear anywhere else. So please join me for that one. And then I'm also probably going to tack on a kind of trade deadline prediction, a type of a segment onto my pick show. And my power ranking show, because I will continue to do that, because that's not just Viking related, that's NFL related. So I will continue to do that every week, despite whether or not we're on a bye. So look for that, because I believe the trade deadline is actually November 5th, so it's coming up here in about a month. And so I'm going to take a look at which teams should be sellers, which players could become available, which guys I think that maybe we could afford, or maybe not spend too much draft capital on. That's going to be super interesting. So just be sure to look out for that as well. Okay, so it's on to our Jets preview, and I'm just going to go ahead and speak on main cam while I read off my notes here. Okay, so just right off the bat, my favorite thing about this game is the Brian Flores and Nathaniel Hackett. That matchup is actually a mismatch in our favor. I think that Flores is going to really own Hackett in this game. I think it's the biggest problem for the Jets, and I think that Flores could potentially own Hackett all game long. Getting on to the quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, we know him really well from his time as being the Green Bay Packers quarterback. He's now 41 years old, and in my opinion, he's playing more or less kind of like a mid quarterback. He's on pace statistically so far this year. I know PFF kind of likes him. I think they have him ranked 6th so far, which kind of shocked me, to be honest with you. He's on pace for about 3,500 yards and 20 touchdowns for the year, even in a 17-game season. And I just think that's just really kind of mediocre in terms of just quarterback performance. So statistically, I just don't think he's really a guy who's going to beat you anymore. And so he doesn't really scare me anymore. His days of being a Packer great are behind him. He's kind of just a guy now. So anyway, where he can be dangerous though is just kind of pulling from his old bag of tricks, throwing out some savvy veteran movements, and maybe coming up kind of big in like clutch or crucial situations. So he's still got that that Rodgers of old still in him. It's inside of him residing somewhere, and he could pull it out, kind of like pick and choose his moments when they're kind of like key moments in the game. So that is something to be a little bit concerned about. So I wanted to talk about this a little bit. This was something, and I don't even remember when. This is Colin Cowherd. I don't remember when he even recorded this. This could have been weeks ago, months ago, days ago. I'm not totally sure. But he said something that I found to be very interesting, because when I had done one of my earlier shows and I was running through power rankings and I was talking about different teams where maybe ESPN had them ranked higher than where I had them, and the Jets fell into that category where I think the ESPN had them at like 15th, which is I think pretty normal, but I had them way down in the 20s. And I just thought to myself, I'm not as big a believer in Aaron Rodgers as maybe the national media and maybe the fan base, the Jets fan base. I just don't think he's the same guy. I think he's proven that more or less through these first 4 games. We'll see how he plays this, later today. But so what Colin talked about in that little segment was that at one point there was kind of a 3-man race for being like the best quarterback of that era. Which was between Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers, I think, at one point had won his first Super Bowl, and at that time, I think people expected him to win more. Of course, Brady, what did he do? He won 7. I think Manning ended up with 3. And so I think at some point, at least according to Colin's opinion, Rodgers noticed that he was never going to be able to catch those two in terms of championships. And so Rodgers switched to being more of an elite stat guy. You started noticing him really care about throwing interceptions and having a really big disparity between the number of touchdowns he throws and the number of interceptions he throws, right? And so I just think that he has a really big ego, and he really worries a lot about his ultimate legacy as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And so I think he's focusing more on being more of a stats guy than being a wins guy. And I just don't view him much as a great team leader. He's kind of a me guy, and the way that he leads is just very gruff and abrasive. And so I just don't think he's a great team guy. I mean, you look at the weirdness that's happening between him and the coach, right? He doesn't really understand when to kind of take a step back and let another guy, lead the team. He kind of steps on toes, and he always wants to just go against the grain. It's a personality trait. I just think that doesn't really work, at least not in today's NFL. And so we're kind of seeing that a little bit with the Jets. I think maybe if the vibes, for lack of a better term, with that team, maybe if they were a little better, maybe they'd be in a little bit better shape so far this year. But either way, his personality is a problem, and I think we all can acknowledge that. So again, getting back to that time that I had mentioned him when I was kind of reviewing the Jets a little bit, talking about how I didn't think they were going to be as good as people thought they were. I had, when I I was already an adult, but when I was watching Rodgers as a Packer, those years ago, he just was always he just made the game look easy. He was always just so decisive. And he could just dagger you, in just a way that just like broke your heart. And I just noticed as he's gotten older and older, and this kind of feeds into that Colin Cowherd opinion about him being more picky about where he, picks and chooses his spots, right? When to try and make a big throw, because he's nervous about his statistics and his ego. And I remember thinking to myself and kind of asking that question out loud when I did that preview of their team, was that why is he so hesitant to pull the trigger now when he gets out of the pocket? He just seems like very much indecisive and just not the same guy, not the same characteristics that he showed earlier in his career. And I couldn't really, put my finger on what the reason was. And I kind of feel like Colin did put the right spin on what I was thinking. And so, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Colin's explanation is as good as any, and I think there is something to that. So that's good, because I think we saw it last week with Love, the way that he aggressively threw the ball down the field over and over, just exhausting our defensive backs, forcing them to make play after play after play throughout the game. I think that those days are gone for Rodgers. I don't think he does that anymore. I don't think he puts that kind of pressure on secondaries anymore, and that's a good thing because we don't want that. So just my final note on Rodgers, he is not the Packers Rodgers that we used to face. He really no longer strikes fear into our hearts as fans or into the hearts of defenses facing him. He's kind of more what I would call him a game manager with wisdom, I think is what I would call him at this point. Okay. I'm going to have to move a little quicker if I want to get to this show. We might be looking at close to an hour and a half. I don't know, but we'll do our best. Okay, so Breece Hall, and Braylon Allen are two young and very talented running backs, and they can definitely gash us if we're not careful. I am worried about both their big play ability and then also their ability to pick up short yardage or maybe score in goal-to-go situations. So if there's one thing, I think so far this year the Jets' running game hasn't really taken off. I think that Allen has been a little bit more productive than Hall so far. But I think when you have two guys that are as talented as these two young guys are, that breakout game where they kind of just, go crazy, it could come at any time. You just don't want it to be against your team. So let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that we can hold these two guys down. Moving on to the receivers, so Garrett Wilson, he certainly has the pedigree, right? He was the 10th overall pick, I think, 3 years ago. But it seems like he's been declining year after year in terms of his productivity. And what's odd about that is he really, for a guy as talented as he is, he should really be ascending as opposed to declining. And obviously last year it had a lot to do with just the really poor quarterback play that they had going on. But this year he has really yet to break out also, and he has Aaron Rodgers now. So something's going on there. There's kind of a disconnect between those two. I don't know what it is. Mike Williams, he's past his prime. He's more of a name now. He's dealt with several injuries throughout his career. He is no longer a downfield threat. He once was. I mean, I remember Herbert hitting him on some long touchdown passes. But these days I think that we should be relatively safe from any deep passing plays. Not only just from him, but I think from essentially anybody, unless maybe Wilson at some point breaks loose, maybe breaks some tackles and gets some yak. But I don't know. I think that our secondary, especially coming off of last week, I think we're going to be really looking out for that. So I don't really see the Jets passing game being a real force in this one. Allen Lazard is kind of a Rodgers favorite, right? They brought him over from Green Bay as a free agent. He's been their best statistical wide receiver so far this year, which hasn't even really been that great. I don't even think he's averaging more than 50 or 60 yards a game, a couple of touchdowns here and there. But he's nowhere near a game breaker. He's more of a big body possession type of a guy. He could definitely be a mismatch for Byron Murphy in this one if Murphy is playing in the slot, which he's kind of been, I don't know, I wouldn't call it 50-50. I haven't been looking at the snaps. But Murphy's definitely been playing both on the inside and the outside. And so I think it'd be much better if we got guys like Josh Metellus benched up on Allen Lazard. All right, so old friend, back onto tight ends now. Old friend Tyler Conklin and then a guy named Jeremy Ruckert are the tight ends. They both grade out as kind of relatively average guys. But we all know that Aaron Rodgers on his best days can turn any tight end really into a superstar on any given night. So I think both of these guys are capable of having a good night if Rodgers gets hot. So they're worth looking out for. But ultimately, I think they're both pretty average dudes. And so just my final note on the Jets' skill positions on offense is that the Jets have put a lot of effort into beefing up the skill position players, just with talent via the draft, via free agency. But if guys like Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall really don't ascend to be those great players that they had hoped they would be, then I'd say overall it's a pretty average group of guys. Okay, so then on to the offensive line here. Oh, hold on. Went too far. Okay, so we know we have found out Morgan Moses is out for this game. I believe he's not even traveling with the team. So their first round pick, and I don't I don't remember his first name, but his last name is Fashanu. I think he's out of Penn State. He's going to fill in at right tackle. So he's a rookie. I think this might be just his second start. He has struggled so far in limited action, and he's been particularly vulnerable versus the pass rush. So I look for Brian Flores to try and attack this guy and take advantage of him. Playing next to him is the guy that all the Vikings fans wanted us to draft the year we ended up drafting Christian Darrisaw when Spielman traded back. He's been a very good, above-average right guard for them going on 4 years now. I think he had one injury-riddled year, but all in all, still a really solid pick for the Jets, so good for them. And good for Vera Tucker. He's doing well. Joe Tippmann is their center. He was drafted in the second round last year. He looks like he could be pretty good for them. He's off to a good start in his career. And it just seems, just kind of my side note here was that it looks like the Jets have made it a point to really invest heavily in their offensive line via the draft. Just with, the Fashanu pick this year, Tippmann last year, and I think maybe there's another guy they drafted somewhere in there. But I digress. Anyway, on to the next guy, which is their left guard, a guy named John Simpson. He's in his 5th season, and he actually looks to be kind of a low-end quality guard. He's a little bit better against the pass than he is against the run. And he actually, in that way, kind of reminds me of sort of a Dalton Reisner type, although Simpson he's about 20 pounds heavier than Reisner, so he plays with more weight, which kind of makes you wonder why he's not as good in the run game. Maybe he's just lacking quickness, I don't know. But so far he's been good. He's been pretty solid against, or at least in pass protection. So we'll see if we can try and take advantage of him. I think the guys to really keep an eye on in this game. Well, let me get to the final guy actually before I talk about that. Is Tyron Smith, the old Cowboys. He played a lot of great years with the Cowboys. He's the left tackle for the Jets. He's 34 years old now though, and he's still playing at a relatively high level, but he definitely has more struggles than he's ever had in his career. He gives up a few pressures every game, and because of his age, he will probably wear down as the game progresses. He's actually in his 14th NFL season this year. He's been around a really long time. I was actually kind of surprised by that. I didn't realize he'd been around that long. But just overall, my final thoughts on just their offensive line as a whole is that there's 3 guys I think we can really take advantage of. I think Fashanu we're going to attack heavily. I think Simpson can definitely be attacked in the middle. And then Tyron Smith is now, because of just his age and just wearing down, I think he can be... you can put some pressure on him, and he'll have a few hiccups throughout the game as well. So there's definitely some opportunities for the pass rush in this one. Just there's a lot of talent on the line, but it's a mix and match of young guys and vets, and just their main weakness is just pass protection. I think they run block pretty well. I don't know why the run game hasn't really taken off for them yet, but hopefully it doesn't take off in this game. But and then just another thing that Rodgers has done throughout his career, and I don't know if he does it quite as much as he has, but he's got that quick release, and so that's going to help the pass blocking look a lot better if Rodgers is getting the ball out on time. Okay, so on to the defense. A little bit more of the beer. No purple Kool-Aid today. We'll call it, beer Kool-Aid. Okay, so I think that KOC, Coach O'Connell, is clearly a better head coach than Robert Saleh. But with that said, Robert Saleh is actually coaching for his job right now, and I just think he's really going to throw the kitchen sink at us, because I think it's not just necessarily about getting a win for them. I think it's also about getting an important win, right? An upset style win, and here we come in 4-0. And it's a real opportunity for him to kind of make his mark on the season, get the Jets up to 3-2, above 500, kind of save his job at least, because there's definitely rumblings out there about him, about how if he doesn't get this thing going in the right direction, I mean, he could be in trouble. So like I was saying, I just think he's going to throw the kitchen sink at us. And I'm just really, really hoping, and I have faith in him, that Coach O'Connell has just a really smart game plan ready to go, just to be prepared for basically anything that comes his way. I really do think this is going to be an ugly game. I think Saleh is going to try and win this game ugly. I think he's going to instruct Hackett to just run the ball a ton and just have Rodgers dink and dunk us to death down the field. They're going to hope to try and play a turnover-free game and really keep it close with a chance to kind of pull it out in the end. So I just expect their defensive philosophy to be to play a little bit dirty. Not calling the team dirty, I'm just saying to play a little bit dirty. in this one in particular. So just lots of grabbing in the secondary, pushing the limits with holds along the offensive line, borderline late hits, that kind of thing. I just think basically what Salah's going to instruct the team is, hey, push the limits on literally every edge we can get throughout this game and force the referees to call it. And so that's something to look out for, because if they get inside our head, if our guys get frustrated, then maybe we start making mistakes and start getting some big flags like personal fouls and just 15-yarders, that kind of thing. So they ultimately, I'm not saying the Jets are a dirty team, but they definitely kind of strike me as a little bit of a slimy team. So it's just something to watch out for in this one. So just remember, just because they're wearing the Jets uniform, and Saleh is their coach, doesn't necessarily mean that they have a great defense. I think the proof is in the pudding. We're going to find out what they really are all about, because the last 3 quarterbacks that they've faced, because their stats look really good so far this year defensively, but the last 3 quarterbacks that they faced after they got their butts kicked by the 49ers in the first Monday Nighter, they've faced Will Levis, Jacoby Brissett, and Bo Nix in 3 consecutive weeks. That's going to make any defense's stats look good. So now they're going up against a real offense, a quarterback who's playing hot, and so we're going to find out what they're all about. Okay, so I don't have a ton to say about the defense. I've just got some little notes here and there, mostly on the D-line, though. The D-line is headed by Quinnen Williams. Is headed up by Quinnen Williams, and he's coming off of 2 really good years. I mean, they're Pro Bowl / All-Pro quality type years. I don't know if he made the Pro Bowl or the All-Pro team. I just know they were at that level of quality. But he really has yet to kind of like step up his game this year. He's kind of ranking about middle of the pack. And I think maybe that's because he's being asked to pick up the slack for the rest of the underperforming defensive line, which includes, I'm talking about the inside guys and the edge guys. They're all underperforming. Javon Kinlaw is their other starting D tackle. He was brought over as a free agent from San Francisco, and he was a former first-round pick. And he's always had really good pass rushing ability, but he's more of a rotational guy, and he's actually playing as a starter for the Jets. So he's just never really developed into a really well-rounded player, and I think that we can take advantage of Kinlaw in the run game if we really kind of just point him out and move him around. The rotational guys on the D-line on the inside have little to no impact at this point, so they got to hope that Quinnen Williams and Kinlaw bring their A-game in this one. So this edge group is the worst, and I said this about the Packers last week. Well, this one's even worse. They're the worst edge group we've seen all year, and it's not even close. At least the Packers had Preston Smith and Rashawn Gary. Okay, those 2 guys have proven themselves to be good quality players. And they even had a couple of young guys like spacing on as like Van Ness, and was the guys, no, I don't think it was Enagbari. It could have been Enagbari, actually. So anyway, a couple of young guys that are developing for them. So the Packers at least had veteran talent, young talent. The Jets have practically nothing. I mean, this group is nothing but a bunch of underperforming veterans, and the only guy who's really doing anything, who isn't he is technically a veteran, but he was a first, because he's in his second year, but he was a first rounder in 2023, and that's Will McDonald. But the thing is that even though he has 5 sacks on the year, he only has 6 pressures. So he doesn't really create a lot of additional pressure unless he's just getting that 1.5 sack per game. So that's a guy I think who can be controlled, even though he has talent and he has good size. Their other really talented defensive end was a guy named Jermaine Johnson, but unfortunately they lost him for the year. He tore his Achilles in the Tennessee game. And of course they've got that Reddick holdout going on, and so he's not there. And then I just happened to notice that our old friend Jalen Holmes is actually a part of this group, which he's not making that much of an impact either. So other than just a couple of guys, this defensive front doesn't look too good for them. Okay, so the linebackers, on the other hand, now you're getting to the strong part of the defense. The linebackers look legit, even with Mosley, I think, being out for this game. And maybe it was Mosley who I was thinking about, who didn't travel with the team. Maybe the other guy was just doubtful. But either way, I don't think anyone I've mentioned to this point is playing who I said wasn't playing. So anyway, so Mosley's out. Their 2 linebackers are Quincy Williams and Jamie Sherwood, and they're playing at a high level right now, especially in coverage. And that could, again, have something to do with the QBs they've been facing, but just beware of testing the short middle in this one, or using the screen game, because I think these guys are fast and smart in coverage. They have a trio of cornerbacks. Obviously, we know about Sauce Gardner. They've got DJ Reed. He's their inside guy. He's really good. And then Michael Carter. And that makes for an excellent trio of corners. And that's the best group of corners we've faced this year. Obviously, Houston had, with Lassiter and Stingley, perhaps the two best outside corners we faced. And these guys definitely are up there with them. But as a group, this is probably the best group of corners we faced this year. So Darnold needs to just cut out any bonehead plays in this one, because if he does, I think these are guys that can make him pay. So he just needs to just not have the bonehead moments, throw on time, be accurate. We should be able to get out of this one. Let's see. Their box safety is a guy named Chuck Clark. I think they traded for him. I think he used to be a Raven. He's a veteran. He seems to be on the decline. So, I'm sure he's a good, solid tackler in the box. But other than that, he's not really a guy who moves the needle. And then their coverage safety is a guy named Tony Adams. He actually appears to be pretty solid. And I don't think he's easily fooled in coverage. So I think that's a guy you have to at least be aware of. So just, on the back end, they're really, really solid. And really my side note on this is, despite the secondary and the linebackers being pretty good, pretty talented, and specifically in coverage, I think any group of defensive backs in the NFL can be beaten consistently by a competent quarterback who is just not dealing with any pressure. And so if our offensive line has a good game and keeps the pressure off of Darnold, I think that Darnold can beat this group all day long. And so I predict that will be the case. Okay. The kicker, Zerline, he's an older dude, and he's actually really been struggling later in his career. I think he's already missed a couple of kicks this year. I think he's hard to trust beyond 40 yards, to be honest. We could be looking at another Narveson situation with this guy. And then Morstead, he's even older than Zerline. He's been around forever, and he's a good, solid veteran kicker, right around the middle. And the thing I noticed about him was that he's had 19 punts this year, and 10 of them have actually been returned, which says to me that he's not getting a ton of hang time. So this could be an opportunity game for Brandon Powell. I mean, I'm not going to go on the record and predict anything, but I think that there's a possibility for Brandon Powell to at least break off a big punt return in this one. So watch out for Brandon Powell. Okay, so we took care of the previews. Now I'm just going to wrap it up with just kind of like my Viking-centric and just game-centric thoughts, and that is, I wanted to talk about the uniforms real quick because I love the old Jets spearmint colored, and I don't know if that's the exact color, but just those green helmets that just remind me of the old 80s and 90s days. I love those old uniforms, and I'm maybe it's because I'm a little bit nostalgic, right? And that was the era of when I grew up watching football, and I just love all of those old uniforms. I mean, I miss the Oilers, the Seahawks old uniforms, the Broncos old uniforms, the old Patriots, the guy on the helmet. I even prefer the Chargers old dark blues over the powder blues, I'll be honest with you. And I know the powder blues are more of a throwback to, I think, like the 70s. I liked from the 80s and 90s, I liked the dark blues, to be honest with you. I hope they bring those back. Anyway, okay, that's enough about jerseys. Okay, so as funny as it is to say this does have unusually low energy, and it does have a classic trap game feel, especially with kind of like even though we have a big divisional game against Detroit kind of looming beyond, right? So it has a trap game kind of a feel, very low energy leading up to it. I could feel it, and maybe it's just coming from the fans and the media, and maybe also kind of in addition to that, the Jets are just kind of an uninteresting team. I mean, honestly, they're just kind of like, okay, yeah, you have Rodgers, but nobody likes Rodgers anymore, so I don't know. I think that has something to do with it, but still, I just can't quite shake the weird vibes of this game, and so although I'm feeling it, and although maybe other fans are feeling it, and that maybe that's kind of the feeling in the media, I'm not so sure the team feels it. Because number one, we have a great coaching staff who's always prepared. I mean, if we're talking about our previous regime, I'd be a little bit more concerned, clearly, even if we were 4-0. And I just think that they're a focused group. They're really just again, just a love football group, right? As Coach O'Connell talked about, guys that love football, and I just think they're looking forward to the opportunity to play in front of the London fans. So you couple that with just the lesson that they learned last week by playing their worst half of football in the second half against the Packers and almost losing that game. And I just honestly believe, even though I'm feeling the weird vibes, I think the Vikings aren't. And so I actually think this will end up being a pretty easy win. So, and then just kind of an extra side note that I didn't quite bring up when I was predicting the actives was that I think that McCain getting called up in this game is in addition to being kind of an interesting wrinkle and me thinking that maybe Asamoah isn't going to dress for this one, but also I had mentioned when I did my game review of the Packers game, I talked about that on that final drive when the Packers just marched right down the field in like a minute, that there were 5 guys on the field who played 70 or more snaps in that game, and they were, let's see if I have them listed out here. Well, anyway, they were Blake Cashman, they were Josh Metellus, Cam Bynum, Harrison Smith, and Byron Murphy Jr. All 5 of those guys got burned on at least one occasion during that final drive. Okay, and it was obvious that they were gassed. So my opinion is that McCain's getting the call up, and instead of Fabian Moreau not dressing and instead Asamoah not being an active, I think you have both McCain and Moreau available for this game. And I think both of those guys will get a little bit of playing time in this one and help those 5 get more rest. Plus, you have the emergence of Camus, who I think could help. Now, with Pace being healthy, I think you could have some situations where Blake maybe takes off a drive or two. Camus comes in to play next to Ivan, and then of course you saw Metellus. You can mix and match with that. So if Ivan needs a break, then you can have Josh come up into the box and play linebacker. So there's a lot of options there, and I just think there are ways for us to keep these guys' snaps down and keep them fresh for the entire game. So that was just something interesting that kind of came to mind when I thought about McCain being called up. I think Moreau will play, and just Camus getting some more playing time because he's really proven that he does belong on the field on defense in addition to special teams. At the end of the day, my final thought is this on the game, and that is, don't get caught up in a weird, mucky game that Saleh wants to play, okay? Get the win, stay healthy, and get the hell out of London. Get back to Minnesota, get our bye, get back to full health, right? Get Hock back, and maybe even get him for the Lions game. Start prepping for the Lions, and let's have that showdown. So let's go into that showdown 5-0. Let's really make that game huge. Let's make it important. And just to kind of wrap it up, my score prediction for this one is going to be Vikings 31, Jets 17. I think it will be relatively close at the half, and I think the Vikings pull away in the second half. Will we get off to another fast start? I don't know. That trend's got to end at some point. We'll trail for a short period of time in this one, but I think ultimately we take control of this one, especially in the second half. We start to pull away a little bit, and I think we will have a relatively easy win in this one. If even with me feeling the way I feel, with just the trust that I have in our team and our coaching staff, I think that they will handle their business. Okay, so you can feel good about that. All right, so and I'm not going to do a scolding segment in this one. For anybody who's watching, that one's actually been kind of fun. I had a really good one last week that I really enjoyed. I didn't really find anything in particular that kind of interested me. I will kind of say this, and maybe I could talk about this at another time, but there's talk about signing Darnold to an extension and making McCarthy sit, more years on his rookie contract. I couldn't disagree with that thought more. I think there is a 0% chance that Darnold is back with us next year, and I can go into more detail about why I feel that way on a future show. In fact, I'll make a note about it. Just to kind of explain myself, because I know a lot of people disagree with that sentiment, because you're like, well, if we have a great quarterback, why get rid of him? It's like, well, we have an even greater quarterback on the way, okay? And I feel very bullish about that opinion. And then just some other things, like I've noticed, God, I get so sick and tired of these clickbait style YouTube accounts especially with the way, the little title they put on the thumbnail. Just throwing out names like Marshawn Lattimore and Dexter Lawrence and things like that are potential trade targets. And listen, I think that we are going to make a move at the trade deadline, and I think it will be an interesting player who will help the team. But it's not going to be... I mean, Lattimore, I think that's possible, because I think that's a guy who has a big contract who maybe the Saints would try and unload. But honestly, I think the Saints feel like they're going to have a shot at the South all year long. Yeah, they've lost 2 in a row, but they showed that they have a high-end ability to their team. And I just don't think the Saints are going to be sellers. So that one, and then the Lawrence thing just doesn't make any sense to me. He's 25 years old. He's quite possibly the best defensive tackle in football. He's a centerpiece of the Giants team. You can get that out of your mind. That's just not happening. Dexter Lawrence will not be a Viking. So anyway, moving on. Okay, we are actually going to do our power rankings. We're at 40 minutes. So I just need to get this fixed here real quick. Boom, we got it. Okay, so we're going to bring over the spreadsheet. Here we go. And then I need to bring it over here for myself so I can look at it. Okay, so we've got some interesting movement on the power rankings. And I know it's kind of weird to do it so late in the week because, a Thursday game's already happened. So, and let me just go look at that. Let me go look at the schedule real quick. I've already forgotten who it was. Oh, yeah, that's right. It was the Falcons-Buccaneers game. The Kirk Cousins 500-yard, 4-touchdown game. Amazing game for him, man. He has totally changed the narrative about him on primetime. So kudos to Kirk Cousins. I know I talk a lot of smack about him, but I feel justified to do that because in his 6 years here, he didn't do much. So maybe the Falcons got a new Kirk. I don't know. I still don't really trust it, but either way, let's move on from Kirk and talk about the power rankings. Okay. My top 8 didn't even move, okay? And the reason why, even with teams like, I think Buffalo lost, Philadelphia lost, New Orleans lost, did Dallas lose? I need to go back here and look at last week. That's right, Dallas beat the Giants, but it was tight. But yeah, the Saints lost a close one to the Falcons. Last second field goal by Koo. Let's see what else happened. The Eagles, they got beat up pretty bad by the Bucks, which was kind of a weird thing to me because the Bucks were like reeling coming off of that Denver loss, and then they bounced right back and beat up on Philadelphia. I don't know what's going on with Philadelphia. I think it's the coaching over there. I think the talent's good, and maybe Hurts... Maybe he reached his ceiling and now he has kind of declined to maybe back where he just is as a quarterback. I'm not sure. They're obviously missing A.J. Green, but I'm still kind of a believer in them. Yeah, and then the 49ers beat up on the Patriots, as well they should. The Chiefs, of course, beat the Chargers in a close one. They lost Rashee Rice for the year. They're having real injury issues, and it's making me really question if they're going to meet the win total I had predicted for them for the year, which I think was like 14 wins. I mean, certainly they're off to a good start, but ultimately I did have them losing to the Ravens in the AFC Championship, and the Ravens have bounced back just like I thought they would after beating Dallas convincingly. Then they come back and they beat the Bills even bigger, and I mean the Bills were hot. So yeah, the Ravens are who I thought they were. All right, back to the power rankings. So anyway, so again, my top 8 didn't move. And that is Kansas City at 1, Baltimore at 2, Detroit at 3. Really nice win for them over Seattle. Their defense didn't look good, but the offense is just so explosive. That run game, the receiving, I mean, Goff's playing great. Detroit, they got a great team, man. It's hard to admit. It's a tough pill to swallow. San Francisco stays at 4, Philadelphia stays at 5, Buffalo stays at 6. New Orleans stays at 7. Dallas stays at 8. Okay, so now here comes our movement. Green Bay, even with the loss to us at home, with that really impressive second half, with me kind of seeing Jordan Love in person and just seeing the way that LaFleur is coaching that offense, I think that Green Bay deserved to move up, and I actually moved them up to 9. And again, I've talked about this in the past. Sometimes these move-ups have something to do with just other teams not deserving to be ahead of them, in my opinion. And just I move teams up and down incrementally. I use these power rankings as a part of my betting process, so I don't do huge shifts up and down for the teams. I know I've said that many times. I'll continue to say it for anyone who's watching for the first time, right? Because every show is fresh, right? Every show, once a week is done and games are over, those old shows are just gone. Nobody cares anymore. Okay, so Green Bay's at 9. They moved up 2 spots from 11 from last week. Cincinnati moved down 1 spot from me. They're down to 10. Even though they did beat Carolina and finally got their first win, still, they haven't been playing great this year. I felt like they deserved to move down. The Rams, I moved them down. They're really struggling. They're dealing with the injuries. I think that Kupp and Nakua aren't that far off. I think they will get them back probably in time to play us, which kind of sucks, but I still am a believer in McVay, even though the defense is really hurting them, and if the offense can't get it going, I mean, they lost to the Bears. So, I mean, when you let Caleb Williams beat you, I do question your defense. And sorry for all the Caleb Williams fans out there. All right, Tampa I had moving up 2 with that impressive win against the Eagles. I have us up another 3. We were at 16 last week. Now we're up to 13. And I have us up 12 overall spots when we started the year at 25. So we're on our way up. If we continue to get win after win, we're going to be up there in no time. I thought, again, I talked about this in my last show, I thought it was a little bit disingenuous for teams to already have us in the number 1 or number 2 spot. That seems a little weird for you to just think so low of us to start the year and then just raise us up all the way to the top spot after just 4 weeks. Whatever. So anyway, I've got us at 13. All right, so the Chargers, I actually had them moving up 1. I'm still a believer in Harbaugh. I'm still a believer in Herbert. They had lost a close one to the Chiefs. I mean, that's the best team in my opinion in football. So what can you do? The Steelers lost a weird one to, I will go and just double check that, to the Colts. And Flacco even played most of that game. Weird loss for the Steelers. Kind of a non-Steelers situation, right? They're playing in Indianapolis in a dome. Maybe the Steelers didn't get to Steeler the way they wanted to in that one. So I have them down 2. I had them as a major riser up until that point. So they dropped that back down to earth just a little bit. Miami, they're free-falling, man. I had them, they started the year at 10 for me. They're at 16 now. They're down another 4. Just their quarterback situation looks really bad. Huntley looked really bad. That loss to Tennessee was just so unimpressive to me. Mike McDaniel might be losing that team, man. I don't know what to think about them. It seems like when they're going great, everyone's super happy, but when things are going bad, that team just looks like a kind of a collection of, pricey, polished, shiny toys. There's really no substance to that team. So, yeah, Miami's maybe not the team I thought they were to start the year. So Houston, their wins have not really impressed me this year. They did, I think with the way people felt about Jacksonville, and I had Jacksonville falling quite a bit too. I originally, I thought Trevor Lawrence and Peterson would have them on a good year. I think I had them winning the AFC South, and then they're 0-4 now. They lost a really close one to Houston. Houston got that late touchdown to beat them at home, and I just think maybe Jacksonville showed a little bit of moxie in that one. I mean, yes, they're 0-4. Their season might be done for unless they just completely turn it around on a dime. But I just, with the way Jacksonville was going, and Houston, with the way people think about them, I thought maybe they'd beat them by more. So to this point in the year, Houston hasn't really impressed me that much. Stroud really hasn't taken off yet like people thought he would. So they're at 17. They're up 1 week, 1 from last week for me. Seattle, I'm still, even though they lost to Detroit, I thought the offense looked really good. The reason why I just haven't been a believer in Seattle, again, was just strength of schedule so far. They just hadn't really faced anybody. Everybody was talking about their defense. And I don't really know who their coach is. I can't really remember the name of every coach, especially when all these rookie coaches come in. I don't know where they come from. Sometimes I just haven't even heard of them. So even though they were off to a 3-0 start, I just didn't really think much of who they had played. Everyone was talking up the defense. I'm like, yeah, but look at the quarterbacks they faced. So I was kind of like wait and see on them. And but I thought the offense, I thought Geno looked really good. I think the running game looks really good. But the defense, I think, is questionable. So they're up 1 from last week, up to 18 now. A good showing against Detroit, at least offensively. Jacksonville's down another 2. I have to keep dropping them because they're 0-4 now. They did lose to Houston. They're at 19 now. I have Chicago and Atlanta kind of just holding tight. Atlanta, I think, will probably be moving up this next week with that win against Tampa, which was a good win because I had Tampa as my 12 coming into this week. And Kirk has kind of shown me a little bit more than what I was expecting, but every single game's been close. But I will say this: their first 5 games, if you go look at their schedule, they might have had the most difficult first 5 out of any team in the NFL, and they came out of it 3-2. So I think maybe that was a little bit of a momentum, a little bit of a spark for Atlanta. I could see them kind of starting to rise up a little bit after this one. Chicago, I think they gritted out a win against the Rams, a depleted Rams team in their house. When I looked at the box score, Caleb Williams completed a lot of passes to running backs and tight ends. Swift had a real breakout game in this one. He was kind of the reason that they won, in addition to the defense playing as well as they did. Stafford, just if he doesn't have his guys, he really struggles. So a good win for Chicago, but I wasn't overly impressed. I still have them at 20. Okay, and then we talked about Atlanta. They're at 21. Okay, Indianapolis, I rose them up 2, beating the Steelers. That was impressive in my opinion, especially with Flacco at quarterback. So I put them up 2 at 22. Vegas, I think I've had it literally at 23 the entire year. I just haven't moved them up or down. I think that they got kind of as I expected, kind of a sloppy win against the Browns. Yeah, they beat the Browns 2016. So I feel like that's kind of right for them. They're just kind of right in there, just nestled right there in the kind of the early to mid 20s. Washington, they are on the rise. That offense, I don't know if there's any offense in football that has looked as impressive as those guys. Jaden Daniels, he is really busting out. What can you say? Washington could be a real threat in the NFC East. If the Cowboys and Eagles continue to struggle, you could be looking at Washington winning the NFC East, which would have been a crazy thought to start the year. So they're on a slow rise right now. They're 24th. I had them starting the year at 29, but if they keep playing like that, they're going to be rising up this board pretty quick. And I talked about them last week about how, hey, they look great against Cincinnati. What do they do this week? Sure enough, I rose them up 4, so they're on their way. Arizona, I prematurely kind of was on their bandwagon. I thought Kyler was back. Turns out no. So I actually had them dropping 3 because they got blown out by Washington. So not impressed by Arizona in that one, and maybe they're falling back down to where I thought they were, right? I started them in the year at 27, so they're at 25. Down 3 from last week, but up 2 for the year. The Jets I had dropping down to 26. Losing to the Broncos, it was a sloppy game for sure, but the Broncos, I just don't think much of the Jets. I started them out this year at 22. Now they're at 26. I just have not liked the way they've played. We'll see how they look in the morning, or in a couple hours now. 5.5 hours away. Okay. Denver I have holding steady at 27. They're actually down 1 on the year. Nice win over the Jets, but I don't consider the Jets to be a great team, so Knicks maybe is, I don't know. We'll see. Cleveland's down another 2. They started at 24, now they're at 28. They're down 2 from last week. That team just looks like a mess. I don't have high hopes for Stefanski. I'm sure he'll land on his feet somewhere, but it doesn't look like it's going too good in Cleveland for him right now, and that bums me out because I love Stefanski. He's a great guy. Tennessee holding steady even with that win against Miami. This is a classic case of a backup quarterback coming in, Mason Rudolph, right? He comes in, he plays for Levis. He gives the team a slight amount of stability. The team responds. They get a nice win out of it. That's just not sustainable. You know what I mean? Levis isn't the answer. Neither is Mason Rudolph. I don't think they're any better than the 29th team in the league. The Giants I have back up to 30 to match their start of the year ranking, up 1 from last week simply because New England I just thought was worse. They got blown out by the Niners, so I've been kind of flip-flopping those guys all year. But Giants at 30, Patriots at 31. Carolina lost to the Bengals. Yet another situation where a backup comes in, makes a team look a little better, but ultimately they're still not a very good team. They've been the worst team in the NFL, in my opinion, to start the year, and through all 4 weeks so far, I've never moved them off of 32. Okay, that does it for the power rankings, and hopefully the Vikings will be moving up into the top 10 this week. Maybe they can beat the Jets by 3 touchdowns. Wouldn't that be nice? Okay, so let's move into our weekly picks. This is always fun. Okay, let's talk about last week real quick. And we are at 54 minutes. This is going good. This is going good. I actually am not going to go as long as I thought. So combining the shows together really worked out. So if you just take a look at my early window games, man, that was a real struggle. But then I really rebounded nicely with the late games. And so I ended up, let's just move this down a little bit so you can see this. My week 4, I ended up 9-7 straight up, 9-7 against the spread. But my Fermented Five, unfortunately, was a 2-3, which puts me at what, 9-11. I'm 11-9 on my Fermented Five so far this year. Hopefully, man, I would love to get some more money. Hopefully, we can go 5-0 this week. We'll find out. So just to kind of review the Fermented Five. That game against Atlanta, I had New Orleans winning it, and then I had, just for the Fermented Five part, the betting part, I had New Orleans covering the spread. Now, when I had placed the bet, I actually had New Orleans +1. The spread ended up being +2.5, and had I gotten the 2.5, the +2.5 spread, I actually would have won. Although it wouldn't have mattered because I wouldn't have gotten all 5 on my parlay. But that was kind of a bad beat for me because they did have the win, and they did have the cover up until that coup field goal. I thought the Rams would beat the Bears, or at least cover the 3.5. They didn't. So yeah, the Bears just kind of pulled away in that one. And then the Jets, I don't even know why I put money on those guys. I thought that they would defeat the Broncos pretty handily, and they just didn't. So they couldn't score. So, and just, I think maybe when I put the money down, I think the spread on that one was New York by 7.5. It moved up to 8.5, which is like crazy. It continued to get bigger. Just people believe in the Jets way too much. It's kind of nuts. New York teams, right? The East Coast bias. So anyway, so that we're done with last week. On the season, I'm overall 37-27 straight up, 36-28 against the spread. Okay, so we're still above 500. We're still doing okay. So then just real quick talk about the Thursday game. For the Thursday game, I picked Tampa to win, and because the Falcons were getting 2.5, or giving 2.5, excuse me, I had at the very least the Bucks covering those 2 points, and they're at the end, they had it and they blew it. So that was kind of a bad beat. So that was actually one I was considering putting money on and adding it as a part of my parlay. I ended up kind of like really not getting around to like placing the bet on time, so that game ended up just being played and I didn't have a chance to get to it. But I'm glad I didn't, because that would have ruined my parlay on Thursday. So maybe I'll just make it a rule to not bet on the Thursday game. Those games are kind of weird. All right, so anyway, so we're going to skip Jets and Vikings, because I am putting money on the Vikings this week. Okay, so our first one, we've got, Panthers at Bears. Bears favored by 4. My spread came out, Bears by 7, which means I'm picking the Bears to win and to cover those 4 points. Next up, we have Ravens at Bengals. The Bengals are actually underdogs by 2 points in this one at home. My spread came out Ravens by 6, so I actually have the Ravens winning, and I have them covering those 2 points. Okay, next up we have Browns at Commanders. The Commanders have a 3. They're favored by 3 at home. My spread came out Commanders by 10, which means I have the Commanders both winning and covering. Colts at Jaguars. Jaguars, ironically, are favored by 3, even being 0-4. My spread actually came out Jaguars by 3, which means I do think that the Jaguars will win the game, but that I think it'll be a push. So I went ahead and chose Jacksonville to cover the 3. So we'll see how it goes. I think that'll be a pretty tight one. All right, so then next you have Bills at Texans. Here's something weird about this game. When I first looked at this spread early in the week, I think Houston was +1. Now Houston is favored by 1.5 at home. So I don't know what's going on with the Bills. There's like an injury I missed or something. But anyway, I have the Bills winning. So they'll take that 1.5 and they'll win. Okay, then you have Raiders at Broncos. Broncos favored by 2.5, getting some love after that weird Jets win. My spread came out Raiders by 3. So the Raiders are going to take those points and they're gonna get that win. Okay, then not that one. Then we have Packers at Rams. Okay, the Rams are underdogs by 3 at home, as well they should be, because Packers fans travel great and the Rams never get a great home crowd. So expect that crowd to be mostly Packers fans. My spread, ironically though, because I'm still a big believer in Stafford and McVay and, you know, some of the other guys on that team, my spread actually came out as a push, so I'm gonna go ahead and pick Green Bay for the win, but I think that the Rams are gonna cover the 3. Okay, and then my final pick, that's not a Fermented 5 game, because we only have 14 games this week, not 16, because we got four teams. Our very first bye week of the season, we got 4 teams on a bye. Okay, we have. It looks like the Monday nighter, the Saints at the Chiefs. The Chiefs are favored by 5.5. My spread came out Chiefs by 12, so I got the Chiefs winning and covering. Okay, so let's move on to the Fermented 5, friends. Let's do it.
Fermented 5.
All right, time for the Fermented 5. Let's go ahead and bring it back to the spreadsheet. We'll bring it back on over. Okay, our Fermented 5 for this week, friends, is Jets at Vikings. Vikings favored by 2.5 in London. My spread came out huge. Vikings by 18, so I've got the Vikings winning easily, covering easily. Next up, we have Dolphins at Patriots. I don't love putting money on the Dolphins, but I think Huntley will bounce back, and I think McDaniel will bounce back. And it's the Patriots, and they've been kind of fading. So, Patriots underdogs by 1.5 at home. My spread came out Dolphins by 11, so I've got the Dolphins winning on the road and also covering that 1.5. Next up, we have Cardinals at 49ers. I bet on the 49ers with a 10-point spread last week. They covered it, so I'm going to do it again. Cardinals at Niners. Niners favored by 7 at home. My spread came out huge, 23 points in their favor, so I got the Niners easily winning and covering. Then we have Giants at Seahawks. Seahawks favored by 7 at home. My spread came out 18 in favor of Seattle, so I've got the Seahawks winning easily, covering easily. And then finally, we have, I think, a classic NFL game. It's really fun to see it on the field, right? The Steeler helmet and the Cowboy helmet. Kind of weird to me, the Steelers. I know they're at home, I get it, but for the Steelers to get 2.5 at home, or to give rather, that just struck me as weird. I just think people are really down on Dallas and really high on Pittsburgh, but I don't see it that way. So my spread actually came out Dallas by 8, so I've got Dallas winning the game and just taking those points, winning that game. So that is my Fermented 5. And to show you that I put my money where my mouth is, we're going to show you the bet slip. Sorry, hold on. I pulled that up too quick. Okay, here's what we're looking at. We're looking at the bet slip. So just like I said, on the Fermented 5, we have a 5-team parlay. My winnings would come out to $502.30 plus my 20 back. I've got Vikings covering 2.5 in London over the Jets. I've got the Dolphins covering 1.5 at the Patriots. I've got the Niners covering 7 at home against the Cardinals. I've got the Seahawks covering 7 at home against the Giants. And I've got the Cowboys taking the 2.5 on the road and getting a win against Pittsburgh. How about that, huh? Good times. All right, let's bring it back over here. We're going to wrap this show up. I think I talked about everything I wanted to talk about, guys. So, hey, brand new shirt, too. Did you see that one? Nice little JJ with the gritty matching hat, and all that. So, good times to be had. So, anyway, as we always, with the mantra, right? And that is, play vicious, be victorious. Peace.